growing global concern over the human suffering in Yemen as the civil war there stretches into its third year. And there's also mounting condemnation of Saudi Arabia and its coalition supporting the Yemeni government as they press on in their battle against Iran-backed Houthi rebels. Now, yesterday, an attempt was made in the U.S. Senate to halt an arms sale to one of those allies, Bahrain, in what Senator Rand Paul called a proxy vote on the war in Yemen. But that effort failed. This is even as the civilian death toll in Yemen rises to the tens of thousands. A cholera epidemic afflicts hundreds of thousands, and millions more now face possible starvation. Well, for more, let's go to Washington and speak with Scott Paul. He is the humanitarian policy lead for Oxfam America. And Scott, before we get on the humanitarian situation, just I want to talk about this amendment that Senator Paul tried to bring there in the Senate to stop arms sales to Bahrain. How important or not are these kind of political moves to try to at least restrain or send a message to Saudi Arabia over its actions in Yemen?
All of the different ways that members of Congress are responding to U.S. policy in Yemen have been critical. They're moving the way the parties each think about the upcoming peace process. You mentioned Senator Paul's move against the Bahrain arms sale. There was also earlier this week an effort to cut off support writ large in the House of Representatives for the Saudi-led coalition. There will be a similar vote in the Senate, and then there was another bill just introduced yesterday by a senior group of bipartisan senators to more surgically identify key aspects of U.S. support that need to be stopped. At this point, the common thread with all of this is that members of Congress, after more than 3.5 years, are trying to figure out a way to communicate that the policy of unlimited and unconditional support to the Saudi-led coalition, while the world's largest food emergency spirals out of control, is not and should not be U.S. policy.
All right, we'll get to that food emergency in a minute, but I just want to ask you, Saudi Arabia basically calling a temporary, let's call it a ceasefire or a truce at the key port of Hodeidah. Do you think the Saudis may be finally, in a sense, getting the message?
I hope so, and frankly, I hope all of the parties get the message. The Emiratis are playing a key role in this conflict. The Houthis are playing a key role in this conflict. All of them are driving suffering. To this point, because the international community has given such a blank check to the Saudi-led coalition, all of the parties have felt there's more to gain from fighting than from talking. The recent moves over the past week are promising, but at the end of the day, all of these parties have really what they see as existential interests in the conflict. And so it's up to the international community to send an equally strong message that, again, with the humanitarian situation where it is, this kind of ongoing fighting without end, without a clear objective, without a clear endpoint, will not be tolerated.
Okay. Scott, let's move on now to the humanitarian situation. And, of course, we've been hearing over the last couple of years about this cholera epidemic, but now the UN warning about a real famine situation. Tell us about that danger.
Yeah, these are two real twin threats that Yemenis have been facing now for some years that are now coming increasingly to a head. And they're driven essentially by the same issues. It's a failure of government institutions. The government hasn't been able to function in more than 3.5 years. So the health ministries and the education ministries and basic water and sanitation services aren't being provided. And on the flip side, the key humanitarian commodities that people need in order to survive, food, fuel, medicine, when they're coming in at very low levels, and they've been delayed so much that people can't afford them. So you have, on one hand, malnutrition and an inability to afford food. On the other hand, people can't access clean and safe water or access basic health services. And so it ends up becoming a deadly cocktail that can kill you in a number of different ways. It's really inhumane.
Scott, just give us right now, what is the immediate pressing need, the step that has to be done either by Oxfam or by some of the governments involved to address this situation?
Well, Oxfam has reached more than 3 million people with life-saving assistance since 2015. Yemeni organizations are reaching even more people far from the headlines. We need the help, the single most important thing that needs to be done is there needs to be a political settlement. There needs to be an agreement to get government and the central bank to perform its basic functions and to get imports through all of Yemen's ports without any interference. If that happens, collectively, we have a chance to save hundreds of thousands or millions of lives. And for the international community, the way that's going to happen is to make really clear that the military support that the parties to the conflict are receiving will not continue.
All right, let us hope that that message is getting through to the policymakers in Washington, in Riyadh, and everywhere else where it needs to be.